What's up guys, this is going to be a Deathblade video for the Surge engraving, teaching you everything you need to know, whether or not you're going to play this class or you're in tier 1, 2, 3 and will progress into it. By the end of this guide you should know everything you need to know to really maximize your potential for this specific skill. So with that being said, let's get right into it. Alright, so the first thing we're going to talk about, just to get it out of the way, is going to be leveling. If you want to level this, all you really have to know about is going to be Moonlight Sonic here. As soon as you get this, this is going to be your go-to skill. It one-shots pretty much everything in the game. It has a very wide range AoE, hard hitting, will pretty much kill everything while you are leveling up. As far as single target goes for bosses, Soul Absorber is going to be that go-to, and you can throw in anything else. Outside of that, the rest is really up to you guys. You're going to have tons of skill points. You can play around the skills, see what's the most fun, but those are going to be the two main ones for you. I'm not going to talk about the leveling up process too much because it's really easy and doesn't really matter what you pick outside of those two skills. So let's hop into the bread and butter of the Surge Deathblade build. So without getting too far into engravings, basically what engravings are is it's what makes your build what it is. We have two options for Deathblade: remaining energy as well as surge here. Surge is what we're going to be talking about here today. So let's get into that and start just explaining what surge does. So what you're going to get out of a Deathblade with the surge build is you're going to hit extremely hard. But with that being said, let's talk about the identity gauge here. This is what the entire Surge build in the Deathblade class is centered around here. So while you were leveling, you were probably double tapping Z, once to activate it and then once to unleash that hard hitting ability. This is what Surge capitalizes on a ton. So without reading the actual engraving, let me just explain what it does visually so you guys can see. You're going to notice on the bottom here that we're going to have numbers stacking up. What these numbers are, it's going to increase the damage based on the amount of times an ability hits the target. So we're going to hit our Z first. We are going to enter that death trance here. Then as we start using abilities here, you can see right here in the bottom, we have Surge Enhancement, which is increasing the Deathblade Surge damage by 7.5 per stack. And this goes all the way up to 20. So the basis of this build is going to be getting as many stacks as possible, letting everything settle down, and we're at 20, then reactivating that Z for one large hit. As you can see, there's 6.28 million. So that is going to be the basis and overall breakdown of Surge, what it does here, just for a very brief explanation. If you want to go over the engraving and see what it really does, you can see here, if you just read the level 1 skill, Deathblade Surge is cast in the max level of Surge 0 form. A lot of the wording of this may sound confusing, but what it's basically saying is what I showed you here. While it's active, you generate stacks, then you unleash your Z to capitalize on all of the stacks you did earn during that death trance to get the full damage possible. So with that being said, let's talk about one of the most controversial parts, in my opinion at least, the rotation. So the ideal rotation is going to be use Wind Cut, then you're going to activate your Z. The reason you use Wind Cut first is you're going to get 2 stacks since the skill is going to be active, hopefully on your target, while you activate your Z ability. So it's going to be, once again, Wind Cut, activate Z, then you're going to use Spin Cutter, then you're going to be able to Wind Cut again, followed by a Blitz Rush, then back to a Spin Cutter, then you can use Soul Absorber, and finally Z again. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you what that looks like. After this rotation is done, you're going to hit Maelstrom and then your Void Strike charge skill, which is going to refill your death orb meter all the way back to full. So now that I've explained that part, this is going to be the most mathematically efficient rotation for single target on all of your encounters. However, this is my one issue with this rotation, and why I'm going to talk about a few variants here. As we can see here, I am in the training grounds and I have Lumeris here standing still. If you've been playing this game at all, you know that bosses do not ever stand still here. So what I would really recommend for all players is just try to get into a rhythm of doing the opening part of your rotation down, which is opening up with Wind Cut, then hitting Z, then going into Spin Cutter here. And from there, just adjust to whatever the boss is doing. If you have time to use Void Strike, you can do that. If you go above your 14 stacks and want to hit 20 for some big damage, you can absolutely do that as well. This is going to refill your death orb meter all the way back to full without having to use any other skills as seen here. Another thing to keep in mind is going to be our ability here called Maelstrom. While Maelstrom is used to provide ourselves with the ability to refill our identity gauge, which is these middle 3 orbs here, if we are following the 14 stack rotation, it also provides a buff for the entire party you're currently in. So of course you are going to be focusing on getting as much damage output as possible. However, there are going to be certain situations that you are going to find yourself in where giving your teammates that extra speed and attack speed during opportune times can interrupt your rotation, and it's going to be more beneficial for the group as a whole. On top of that comes down to the Soul Absorber ability here. Personally, I enjoy using Soul Absorber as a movement ability because, like I said before, most encounters the boss is moving significantly. So if the boss leaps away from you and you find yourself at a decently far distance away, you can then use your Soul Absorber to then reconnect with the boss, not miss out on any damaging abilities, and be able to save your spacebar dash. On top of that, you also have Dark Axle, and I'm going to show you the tripods that are ideal next. But Dark Axle allows you to jump over any single boss that Lost Dark can throw at you, and personally I believe it's one of the strongest tools to have as a Deathblade overall. This gives you the opportunity to be able to Dark Axle over your target and then use your E to then counter the boss, because Earth Cleaver is going to be our counter skill. If you're not as comfortable with the counter skill, you can simply use Dark Axle to reposition behind the boss to make sure your Z is always landing and applying the back attack. Blitz Rush is a very strong ability because it gives you range potential. Even if you're not right next to the boss, as long as you are behind it, you can cast Blitz Rush from a distance from the boss and still be able to hit it without being right next to the boss. That being said, let's go over the tripods for the raiding and dungeon build for a Surge Deathblade. First off, I'm going to be explaining this as if you have 333 skill points, of course 5 leftovers, so it's going to be 328. We have Wind Cut with Quick Prep, Sustain Enhancement, and then Thick Sword Energy. Next we have Spin Cutter with Open Weakness, Quick Prep, and then Triple Spin. Next we have Dark Axle with Swift Fingers, Tenacity, and High Axle. Next, Soul Absorber, Swift Fingers, Fist of Darkness, and Have. Next we have Earth Cleaver with Push and Weak Point Detection. If you are in a fight where there are stagger checks, you can also swap to Concussion instead of Push here. And if you want, you can actually keep Concussion on for as long as you want. I personally do enjoy Push here because you do get a 4-meter gap closer here as well as increased damage, even though, as mentioned before, the majority of your damage is going to be from using your Surge second Z skill with 14 to 20 stacks. The next skill we do have is Maelstrom with Orb Control and Dark Order. Dark Order is the ability that's going to give your team the beneficial buff. Next we have Blitz Rush with Vital Point Hit, Charge Enhancement, as well as Shadow Rush. And finally we have Void Strike here with Orb Control, Void Zone, as well as Dark Dimension. Void Zone is good because the Void Zone it does place on the ground is going to grant you a stack every single second, which can be used if you do miss other abilities like Wind Cut. If you place your Wind Cut down and the boss moves out of it, you're going to be behind on your typical rotation. As far as an Awakening skill goes, Flash Blink is going to be the ideal one to use. Ideally, you don't want to use it on a full Death Orb meter. What I personally do during progression is I save it for any type of burst phase we have, just in case 1 or 2 members die early in Abyss Dungeon and we need the extra damage to push a phase or to push for a new stage and mechanic. I can always save Flash Blink here. Outside of that, if you're in very bad positioning, the distance of Flash Blink is rather large and it grants super armor here, so if you're in danger of getting knocked back into a potential fatal position, you can always Flash Blink to reposition yourself. Outside of that, if you are doing content you're very comfortable with, you can open up with Maelstrom and Flash Blink to quickly gain your full Death Orb meters to begin your rotation. So the TLDR about the entire rotation for a Surge Deathblade is, once you hit 14 stacks, start looking for an opening on the boss. They are rarely, if ever, going to be just sitting here like we see in front of us on this training ground. There's always going to be some type of movement in mechanics, so once at 14, even though it is the ideal and most optimal rotation here, I quite often find myself going all the way up to 17 or 20 stacks before activating my Z again. Because as mentioned before, the majority of your damage is going to come from landing that hard-hitting ability, so it's best not to try and force it just because you want to follow some type of proper rotation here, because missing that ability enough times is going to greatly decrease your overall damage. The next thing I want to talk about is going to be the stats you're going to be looking for a Surge Deathblade. If you're in tier 1 and tier 2, your main focus is going to be specialization. Specialization, as we can see here, increases the surge skill damage, the blade art meter recovery through attacks, meaning everything you do while the Z is activated for the first time is going to be gaining this death orb meter kind of behind the scenes. So when you do activate that Z, you're going to gain back whatever you generated during that duration. The next thing we have is skill cooldown reduction by blade art, which is good for getting your skills off of cooldown after you do activate it again. And then finally, your awakening skill damage, which, as I mentioned before, it does hit very hard. The reason why you want to stack this is because the rotation is going to be rather difficult to pull off cooldown wise and death orb regeneration wise. With early on stats, most classes for that matter do feel pretty bad in the early stages with very low item level because of the amount of stats you get. So that is going to be the main reason why you want to stack specialization. Once you get to tier 3, however, this is where you're able to hit a comfortable amount of specialization, which in my personal opinion, it's going to be around 1000. If you can hit 1000 specialization, you're going to have no problems doing any of the rotations you want. After 1000, I would highly recommend going for crit rate, and this is why. If you look at any veteran player or best in slot list, they're going to say have crit and specialization on your neck, and then stack specialization on every single other piece here. Why I elected not to do this is because that advice is coming from people who are 1500 item level, who have a gear set bonus that we don't currently have in tier 3 that provides crit rate on top of a card deck that is also granting additional crit rate. So if you watch any Deathblade that uses the surge or the burst build as they call it, they are going to be critting all of the time. Because, as you've probably figured out by now if you are playing this, the difference between critting with your Z and not critting with your Z is massive damage-wise. So all of this is going to tie into the engravings. Personally, I do like having as close to 700 as possible. That is the number for me that feels good because, like I said before, we don't have the typical card deck, which is going to be this one here, the Lost Wind Cliff. I have been pretty lucky here. I do have to farm Soulless and finish off Saria, and I am going to get that 7% crit rate, but not having this is going to be a huge blow on top of that set bonus that they do have, which is going to be a minimum of 15 additional crit rate. So if you're stacking pure spec in tier 3 and you're completely disregarding crit rate as a whole, it's very likely you're not going to be critting often with Blitz Rush as well as your Z activation, which, as we said, is the majority of your damage. So until we do get that gear set, that is when we would go for just crit rate on the necklace and then full specialization everywhere else. The next thing to talk about is going to be engravings. The first thing to talk about is going to be Surge. Surge, in my opinion, is a rather cheap build compared to many others because all you need optimally is going to be Surge level 1. The difference between Surge level 1 and Surge level 3 is you're going to get 1% attack power per stack, so 14 to 20% additional attack power on stage 3 compared to 0% attack power on stage 1 of this engraving. Now, I'm not going to downplay that amount of attack power isn't going to be significant. However, there are many other powerful engravings that are going to be much more beneficial to us, especially since we're very limited in our options with tier 3, and unless you're wheeling very hard, you're not going to have access to engraving books with full legendary giving you 12 points per engraving. So with this, our best 2 is going to be Adrenaline. Level 3 Adrenaline reads as follows. After using skills, excluding movement skills and basic attack, attack power plus 1% for 6 seconds stacks up to 6 times. When max stacks are reached, crit rate plus 15%. If cooldown reduction due to skill cancel is applied to this effect, it is applied after the end of the skill. So in a nutshell here, Outside of the attack power, we are getting a 15% crit rate, which is going to be a core part of this build to make it work. So I would say Adrenaline is going to be the highest priority for any Surge Deathblade player to get that extra crit rate. The next one's going to be Master of Ambush. I know a lot of people are trying to take Grudge, however, we are a back attack class, and Grudge does provide 20% damage as opposed to 25% here for successful back attacks, and Master of Ambush has no downside to it, whereas Grudge makes you take more damage. From a level 3 Grudge, damage plus 20% to boss or above monsters, incoming damage plus 20%. Down the line, we are going to want both Grudge as well as Master of Ambush, but early on, why take the extra bonus damage from Grudge when we can simply elect to go with Master of Ambush instead, with no penalties, as more players are getting more and more familiar with how this class plays and feels in the current content. The next thing we're going to talk about is going to be gems. Now, there's only one gem that really matters here, unfortunately. I don't currently have it equipped because I had a level 8 tier 3 gem of this. It's going to be increases damage of the surge skill, once again making this spec relatively cheap in the long term because it's the only gem you really need to worry about and focus on. I do currently have that gem up in auction. Someone's already bid 200,000 gold on it, so I'm pretty excited about that. That should be coming in a few hours in the mail. Outside of that, if you're struggling with cooldown, the best cooldown reductions are going to be Maelstrom, Spin Cutter, and then Wind Cut. Those three will help you out a ton in building stacks significantly. Briefly touching on cards, even though I did already go over it, I am currently using max HP at the moment. I am going to be swapping to the Lost Wind Cliff set once I do farm out my Solus and activate the Final Awakening for Saria, but this is going to be a long-term investment for most people, so for the most part, just look for as much damage reduction as possible, whether it's HP or all elemental damage reduction. Now, if you're in tier 1 or 2 and you're wondering what type of gear sets work the best for you, the best advice I could give you is just read the bonuses on them, see what makes the most sense. Attack speed, movement speed, anything with crit rate of course is going to be king as mentioned before, but outside of that it really doesn't matter since you're going to fly through tier 1 and 2 at a relatively quick pace compared to what it's going to be like in tier 3. Personally, most of my alts, which I can bring up here for you right now, as you can see here, I have my main Deathblade, a second Deathblade also in tier 3, but as far as my alts go, they are all wearing Chaos Dungeon gear. None of them are wearing Abyssal Dungeon gear sets, although they have farmed them, mostly because I'm lazy and I know I'm going to progress at a pretty quick pace through this, and I'm not that worried about my damage output, because for the most part, you're going to be outgearing the content and you're never going to fail to a DPS check as long as every member of your raid team is alive. So as far as the Deathblade Surge build goes, in my opinion, it's very open to play however you feel like it. As long as you're getting the stacks and you're landing your Z, I wouldn't say there's any wrong way to play this because the damage is extremely high. We have many tools. As far as mobility goes, lots of our damaging abilities also provides ways to dash out of harm's way. I would say we're absolutely one of the most mobile classes that the game Lost Ark does have to offer here, and while our survivability isn't the greatest, our mobility is strong enough with our damage output, making Blade such a strong class overall. The last thing I want to talk about is going to be a dungeon build to kind of help people get around that. This, you really have tons of options here. For me personally, this is what I run in Chaos Dungeons. We have Spin Cutter, level 7, Dark Axle, level 10 here, which you probably don't need. We have Soul Absorber, Death Sentence, which is very strong, Earth Cleaver, Moonlight Sonic, of course, Maelstrom, and finally Void Strike. The Awakening is going to remain the same as Flash Blink. Now, this is open to however you want to approach this, but just as an example, I'm going to show you the most common combos that you can use in Chaos Dungeons and what I found to be the most effective here. So starting out, of course, our Z and identity is going to be empty. I start with popping Maelstrom, then filling up as much as I can with Soul Absorber, and the most common rotation that I like to do here is going to be a Wind Cut to group them together, then using Earth Cleaver into Dark Axle into Death Sentence right away, and it is for the most part going to one-shot everything you have picked up into the air with Dark Axle. Once everything is grouped again, you can use Moonlight Sonic here, and by then your death orbs are absolutely going to be full. You can reduce your cooldown and start the whole process again, and I'll show it up to you a little bit quicker. The last point I want to talk about here is running around like this, gathering the groups up, then activating your Z here is a great way to get the most out of your Z. And outside of that, there's really not much to min-max here. If you do enough Chaos Dungeons, you're going to figure out what works best for you. There's a lot of freedom as far as what abilities you do want to take. Take whatever's fun, because Chaos Dungeons can get boring if you're going to farm them for a long period of time here. Alright guys, that's going to conclude this video here. I thoroughly enjoy the Surge Deathblade. If you're wondering what it looks like in live combat, I have a few videos, and I'm going to be releasing more videos of me clearing some of the hardest content in this game here. So if you do want to see an application and how I apply all of these things, where I don't follow the typical rotation as strictly as it's written, because it's not ideal until you've ran the same encounter multiple times. Once we start getting into the hard content, we're going to be wiping hundreds of times. We're going to figure out all of the patterns like it's secondhand knowledge. With that being said, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you learned a lot from it. Feel free to leave any feedback in the comment section to see what's working for you. All in all, this game's about having fun. If there are some skills that you don't enjoy using, you can absolutely swap them around. See what works best for you. See what fits your playstyle. As long as you're getting at least 14 stacks and you're landing that Z ability, there's a ton of freedom with this Surge class, and personally, it's one of the reasons why I enjoy the Deathblade so much. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget, if you enjoy this content, smash that like button, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and I will see you all in the next upload.